Howdy, folks. Going to be beginning a series now that is one that I've wanted to do for a long time. I've kind of held off on it because it's a long series and it's going to be a commitment whether I read just the Mike Stackpole part of the series or whether I do the Aaron Alston continuation with the Wraith Squadron. But we're finally going to tackle the X-Wing novels. These are some of my very favorite novels in the Star Wars expanded universe. It's because they stem from my very favorite computer game series, which was the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent in the cockpit playing those games. If you could actually see my console here in front of me, you'd see that I have a laptop, a A10 Warthog throttle to my left, an F-16 FLCS to my right. When Squadrons came out, I got a VR helmet for it. I even wanted to get a full motion chair. The only reason that I haven't is because I don't have room for it. But those games probably shaped my Star Wars fandom more than anything else. They're still, for me, a touchstone to this day, and I thought Michael Stackpole did a tremendous job, both in this novel series and in the comic series that preceded it. So I'll stop yammering here. We'll see how far along we get into this. I hope you guys enjoy this series as much as I do. There is in the opening. This is a little different for the Star Wars novels. For one, they publish a dramatis personae in the front of the novel. I won't read that part, but it's almost got a little teaser here in the very beginning. It says, "This exciting series chronicles the adventures of the most feared and fearless fighting force in the whole galaxy. It is now 2.5 years after the events of the blockbuster film Return of the Jedi, and isolated but still powerful remnants of the Empire are scattered throughout space. These outposts of evil are disrupting galactic peace and threatening to one day overthrow the Rebel Alliance and reestablish its dark tyranny of violence and oppression. They are opposed by a new generation of X-Wing pilots. Following in the footsteps of the squad that defeated the Death Star, the new pilots face a challenge every bit as dangerous and deadly as that of their legendary predecessors, and they are every bit as tough, talented, and determined to succeed. However, their intrepid leader will first have to confront the most difficult task of all: to whip a band of young, rowdy, undisciplined pilots into a well oiled team who will fight together and, if necessary, die for each other to achieve their goal: victory over the Empire. Filled with explosive space action, camaraderie, and non-stop adventure, Star Wars X-Wing is a series you won't want to miss." Dedication to George Lucas. The universe he created is so vital and magical that I remember not only when and where I first saw the film, but when and where I first saw the trailer for the film. If someone had told me then I'd be writing in that universe now, I'd have told them they were insane. Once again, Mr. Lucas, you make dreams come true. Acknowledgements. The author would like to thank the following people for their various contributions to this book: Jana Silverstein, Tom Dupre, and Ricia Meinhardt for getting me into this mess. Sue Rostoni and Lucy Autry Wilson for making it so easy to work in this universe. Kevin J. Anderson, Timothy Zahn, Kathy Tyers, Bill Smith, Bill Slavicsek, Peter Schweifhager, Michael Coggy, and Dave Wolverton for the material they created and the advice they offered. Lawrence Holland and Edward Killam for the X-Wing and TIE Fighter computer games. Chris Taylor for pointing out to me which ship Tycho was flying in Star Wars 6, Return of the Jedi. My parents, my sister Karen, my brother Patrick and his wife Joy for their encouragement and endless efforts to face my other books out on bookstore shelves. Dennis L. McKiernan, Jennifer Roberson, and especially Elizabeth T. Danforth for listening to bits of the story as it was being written and enduring such abuse with smiles and a supportive manner. Chapter 1. You're good, Corin, but you're no Luke Skywalker. Corin Horn's cheeks still burned at the memory of Commander Antilles' evaluation of his last simulator exercise. The line had been a simple comment, not meant to be cruel nor delivered that way, but it cut deep into Corin. I've never tried to suggest I'm that good of a pilot. He shook his head. No, you just wanted it to be self-evident and easily recognized by everyone around you. Reaching out, he flicked the starter switches for the X-Wing simulator's engines. Green 1 has 4 starts and is go. All around him in the cockpit, various switches, buttons, and monitors flashed to life. Primary and secondary power is at full. Oro Krieg, his Gand wingman, reported similar startup success in a high-pitched voice. Green 2 is operational. Green 3 and 4 checked in. Then the external screens came alive, projecting an empty starfield. Whistler, have you finished the navigation calculations? The green and white R2 unit seated behind Corin hooted. Then the nav data spilled out over Corin's main monitor. He punched a button, sending the same coordinates out to the other pilots in green flight. Go to lightspeed and rendezvous on the Redemption. As Corin engaged the X-Wing's hyperdrive, the stars elongated themselves into white cylinders, then snapped back into pinpoints and began to revolve slowly, transforming themselves into a tunnel of white light. Corin fought the urge to use the stick to compensate for the roll. In space, and especially hyperspace, up and down were relative. How his ship moved through hyperspace didn't really matter. As long as it remained on the course Whistler had calculated and had attained sufficient velocity before entering hyperspace, he'd arrive intact. Flying into a black hole would actually make this run easier. Every pilot dreaded the Redemption run. The scenario was based on an Imperial attack on evacuation ships back before the first Death Star had been destroyed. While the Redemption waited for 3 medevac shuttles and the Corvette Korolev to dock and offload wounded, the Imperial frigate Warspite danced around the system and dumped out TIE fighters and added bombers to the mix to do as much damage as they could. The bombers, with a full load of missiles, could do a lot of damage. All the pilots called the Redemption scenario by another name, the Requiem scenario. The Warspite would only deploy 4 starfighters and a half-dozen bombers, known in pilot slang as eyeballs and dupes, respectively, but it would do so in a pattern that made it all but impossible for the pilots to save the Korolev. The Corvette was just one big target, and the TIE bombers had no trouble unloading all their missiles into it. Stellar pinpoints elongated again as the fighter came out of hyperspace. Off to the port side, Corin saw the Redemption. Moments later, Whistler reported that the other fighters and all 3 medevac shuttles had arrived. The fighters checked in, and the first shuttle began its docking maneuver with the Redemption. Green 1, this is Green 4. Go ahead, 4. By the book, or are we doing something fancy? Corin hesitated before answering. By book, Noara Ven had referred to the general wisdom about the scenario. It stated that one pilot should fly Fleet Hunt and race out to engage the first TIE flight while the other 3 fighters remained in close as backup. As long as 3 fighters stayed at home, it appeared, the Warspite dropped ships off at a considerable distance from the Korolev. When they didn't, it got bolder, and the whole scenario became very bloody. The problem with going by the book was that it wasn't a very good strategy. It meant one pilot had to deal with 5 TIEs, 2 eyeballs, and 3 dupes, all by himself, then turn around and engage 5 more. Even with them coming in waves, the chances of being able to succeed against those odds were slim. Doing it any other way was disastrous. Besides, what loyal son of Corellia ever had any use for odds? By the book. Keep the home fires burning and pick up after me. Done. Good luck. Thanks. Corin reached up with his right hand and pressed it against the lucky charm he wore on a chain around his neck. Though he could barely feel the coin through his gloves and the thick material of the flight suit, the familiar sensation of the metal resting against his breastbone brought a smile to his face. It worked for you a lot, Dad. Let's hope all its luck hasn't run out yet. He openly acknowledged that he'd been depending quite a bit on luck to see him through the difficulties of settling in with the Alliance forces. Learning the slang took some work. Moving from calling TIE starfighters eyeballs to calling interceptors squints made a certain amount of sense, but many other terms had been born of logic that escaped him. Everything about the rebellion seemed odd in comparison to his previous life, and fitting in had not been easy. Nor will be winning this scenario. The Korolev materialized and moved towards the Redemption, prompting Korin to begin his final check. He'd mulled the scenario over in his mind time and time again. In previous runs, when he served as a home guard to someone else's fleet hunt, he'd had whistlers record traces on the TIE's incoming patterns, flight styles, and attack vectors. While different cadets flew the TIE half of the simulations, the craft dictated their performance, and a lot of their initial run sequence had been pre-programmed. A sharp squawk from Whistler alerted Korin to the Warspite's arrival. Great. 11 clicks aft. Pulling the stick around to the right, Korin brought the X-Wing into a wide turn. At the end of it, he punched the throttle up to full power. Hitting another switch up to the right, he locked the S-foils into attack position. Green 1 engaging. Rysati's voice came cool and strong through the radio. Be all over them like drool on a hut. I'll do my best, Green 3. Korin smiled and waggled the X-Wing as he flew back through the Alliance formation and out towards the Warspite. Whistler announced the appearance of 3 TIE bombers with a low tone, then brought the sound up as 2 TIE fighters joined them. Whistler, tag the bombers as targets 1, 2, and 3. As the R2 unit complied with that order, Korin pushed shield power full to front and brought his laser targeting program up on the main monitor. With his left hand, he adjusted the sighting calibration knob on the stick and got the 2 fighters. Good. Looks like 3 clicks between the eyeballs and the bombers. Korin's right hand again brushed the coin beneath his flight suit. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, then settled his hand on the stick and let his thumb hover over the firing button. At 2 clicks, the heads-up display painted a yellow box around the lead TIE fighter. The box went green as the fighter's image locked into the HUD's targeting cross, and Whistler's shrill bleat filled the cockpit. Korin's thumb hit the button, sending 3 bursts of laser bolts at the lead fighter. The first set missed, but the second and third blasted through the spherical cockpit. The hexagonal solar panels snapped off and spun forward through space, while the ion engines exploded into an expanding ball of incandescent gas. Korin kicked the X-Wing up in a 90-degree snap roll and sliced through the center of the explosion. Laser fire from the second fighter lit up his forward shields, making it impossible for him to get a good visual line on the TIE. Whistler yowled, complaining about being a target. Korin hurried a shot and knew he hit, but the TIE flashed past and continued on in at the Korolev. Time to write a new chapter for the book on the Requiem scenario. Korin throttled back almost all the way to 0 and let the X-Wing decelerate. Whistler, bring up target 1. The image of the first TIE bomber filled his monitor. Korin switched over to proton torpedo target control. The HUD changed to a larger box, and Whistler began beeping as he worked supplying data to the targeting computer for a missile lock. Green 1, your velocity is down to 1%. Do you need help? Negative, Green 2. Korin, what are you doing? Making the book a short story. I hope. The HUD went red, and Whistler's tone became constant. Korin punched the button and launched the first missile. Acquire target 2. The HUD flashed yellow, then red, and the pilot launched the second missile. Numbers scrolled away to 0 as the missiles streaked in at their targets. 2 kilometers away, the first missile hit, shredding the first TIE bomber. Seconds later, the second missile hit its target. A nova-like explosion lit the simulator's cockpit, then melted into the blackness of space. Acquire target 3. Even as he gave the order, he knew the rate of closure between the bomber and his ship would make the last missile shot all but impossible. Cancel 3. Korin throttled up again as the third bomber sailed past and brought his ship around. He switched back to laser targeting and climbed right up on the bomber's stern. The dupe's pilot tried to evade him. He juked the double-hulled ship to the left, then started a long turn to the right, but Korin was of no mind to lose him. He cut his speed, which kept the bomber in front of him, then followed it in its turn. As he leveled out again on its tail, he triggered 2 laser bursts and the targeting computer reported hull damage. The bomber's right wing came up in a roll and Korin did the same thing. Had he continued to fly level, the X-Wing's lasers would have passed on either side of the bomber's fuselage, giving the bomber a few seconds more of life. Keeping the bomber centered in his crosshairs, Korin hit twice more and the bulky craft disintegrated before him. Pushing his throttle to full, Corin scanned for the fighter he'd missed. He found it 2 clicks out and going in towards the Korolev. He also found 5 more ties coming in from the other side of the Corvette, 18 kilometers away. Damn, the bomber took more time than I had to give it. He brought the torpedo targeting program back up and locked onto the remaining fighter. The HUD seemed to take forever before it went red and acquired a lock. Corin fired a missile and watched it blast through the fighter, then turned his attention to the new ties. Green 1, do you want us to engage? Corin shook his head. -2. Warspite is still here and could dump another flight. He sighed. Move to intercept the fighters, but don't go beyond a click from the Korolev. On it. Good. They can tie the fighters up while I dust these dupes. Corin studied the navigational data Whistler was giving him. The Korolev, the bombers, and his X-Wing formed a shrinking triangle. If he flew directly at the bombers, he would end up flying in an arc, which would take more time than he had, and let them get close enough to launch their missiles at the Corvette. That would be less than useless as far as he was concerned. Whistler, plot me an intercept point 6 clicks out from the Korolev. The R2 whistled blithely, as if that calculation was so simple even Corin should have been able to do it in his head. Steering towards it, Corin saw that he'd have just over a minute to deal with the bombers before they were in firing range on the Korolev. Not enough time. Flicking 2 switches, Corin redirected generator energy from recharging his shields and lasers into the engines. It took the acceleration compensator a second to cycle up, so the ship's burst of speed pushed Corin back into the padding of his command seat. This better work. Green 1, the Warspite is hyped. Are we released to engage fighters? Affirmative 3. Go get 'em. Corin frowned for a second, knowing his fellow pilots would make short work of the TIE fighters. They would deny him a clean sweep, but he'd willingly trade 2 ties for the Corvette. Commander Antilles might have gotten them all to himself, but then he's got 2 Death Stars painted on the side of his X-Wing. Whistler, mark each of the bombers 4, 5, and 6. Range to intercept was 3 clicks, and he had added 30 seconds to his fighting time. Acquire 4. The targeting computer showed him to be coming in at a 45-degree angle to the flight path of his target, which meant he was way off target. He quickly punched the generator back into recharging lasers in his shields, then pulled even more energy from his quartet of Incom 4L4 fusible thrust engines and shunted it into recharging his weapons and shields. The resource redirection brought his speed down. Corin pulled back on the stick, easing the X-Wing into a turn that brought him head-on into the bombers. Tapping the stick to the left, he centered the targeting box on the first of the dupes. The HUD started yellow, then quickly went red. Corin fired a missile. Acquire 5. The HUD started red, and Whistler's keen echoed through the cockpit. The Corellian fired a second missile. Acquire 6. Whistler screeched. Corin looked down at his display. Scrolling up the screen, sandwiched between the reports of missile hits on the 3 bombers, he saw a notation about Green 2. Green 2, report! He's gone, 1. A fighter got him? No time to chat. The comm call from the Twi'lek and Green 4 ended in a hiss of static. Rasati? Got one, Corin, but this last one's good. Hang on! I'll do my best. Whistler, acquire 6. The R2 unit hissed. The last bomber had already shot past the intercept point and was bearing in on the Korolev. The pilot had the wide-bodied craft slowly spinning, making it a difficult target for a missile lock. The Korolev, being as big as it was, would present large enough of a target that even a rolling ship could get a lock on it. And once he has that lock, the Korolev is so much space junk. Corin switched back to lasers and pushed his X-Wing forward. Even though 2 clicks separated them, he triggered a couple of laser blasts. He knew his chances of hitting were not good at that range, but the light from the bolts would shoot past the tie and give the pilot something to think about. And I want him thinking about me, not that Nerf vet grazing there. Corin redirected all power into the engines and shot forward. 2 more laser blasts caused the TIE bomber to shy a bit, but it had pushed into a new target acquisition range. The ship's roll began to slow as the pilot fixated on his target. Then, as Corin brought his lasers to bear, the bomber jinked and cut away to port. The Corellian's eyes narrowed. Bror Jace has got to be flying that thing. He thinks it's payback time. The other pilot, a human from Thefera, was, in Corin's opinion, the second best pilot in the training squadron. He's going to kill the Korolev, and I'll never hear the end of it. Unless. Corin pulled all his shield energy forward and left his aft as naked as the shieldless TIE bomber. Following Jace through a barrel roll, he kept the throttle full forward. As they leveled out again, Corin triggered a snapshot at the bomber. It caught a piece of one wing, but Jace dove underneath the X-Wing's line of fire. Here we go! Corin shoved his stick forward to follow the bomber's dive, but because his rate of speed was a good 20% faster than that of Jace's ship, the X-Wing moved into a broad loop. By the time Corin inverted to finish the turn-off, Jace's bomber came back up and banked in on the X-Wing's tail. Before the bomber could unload a missile or two into his aft, Corin broke the fighter hard to port and carved across the bomber's line of fire. Basic maneuver with a basic response. Without even glancing at his instruments and paying no attention to Whistler's squealed warning, Corin cut engine power back into recharging his shields. One more second. Jace's response to Corin's brake had been a reverse throttle hop. By bringing the nose of the bomber up in a steep climb, then rolling out in the direction of the turn, Jace managed to stay inside the arc of the X-Wing's turn. As the bomber leveled off, it closed very quickly with the X-Wing. Too quickly for a missile lock, but not a laser lot. The TIE bomber shrieked in at the X-Wing. Collision warning klaxons wailed. Corin could feel Jace's excitement as the X-Wing loomed larger. He knew the other pilot would snap off a quick shot, then come around again, angry at having overshot the X-Wing, but happy to smoke Corin before taking the Korolev. The X-Wing pilot hit a switch and shifted all shield power to the aft shields. The deflector shield materialized as a demisphere approximately 20 meters behind the X-Wing. Designed to dissipate both energy and kinetic weapons, it had no trouble protecting the fighter from the bomber's twin laser blasts. Had the bomber used missiles, the shields could even have handled all the damage they could do, though that would have been enough to destroy the shields themselves. The TIE bomber, which massed far more than the missiles it carried, should have punched through the shields and might even have destroyed the fighter, but it hit at an angle and glanced off. The collision did blast away half the power of the aft shield and bounced the X-Wing around, but otherwise left the snub fighter undamaged. The same could not be said of the unshielded bomber. The impact with the shield was roughly equivalent to a vehicle hitting a ferrocrete wall at 60 kilometers per hour. While that might not do a land vehicle much damage, land vehicles are decidedly less delicate than starfighters. The starboard wing crumpled inward, wrapping itself around the bomber's cockpit. Both pods of the ship twisted out of alignment, so the engine shot it off onto an uncontrolled tumble through the simulator's data space. Green 3, did you copy that? Corin got no response. Whistler, what happened to 3? The R2 unit gave him a mournful tone. Sith spawn. Corin flipped the shield control to equalize things fore and aft. Where is he? The image of a lone TIE fighter making a strafing run on the Korolev appeared on Corin's monitor. The clumsy little craft skidded along over the corvette's surface, easily dodging its weak return fire. That's seriously gutsy for a TIE fighter. Corin smiled. Or arrogant, and time to make him pay for that arrogance. The Corellian brought his proton torpedo targeting program up and locked onto the TIE. It tried to break the lock, but turbolaser fire from the Korolev boxed it in. Corin's HUD went red, and he triggered the torpedo. Scratch one eyeball. The missile shot straight in at the fighter, but the pilot broke hard to port and away, causing the missile to overshoot the target. Nice flying. Corin brought his X-Wing over and started down to loop in behind the TIE, but as he did so, the TIE vanished from his forward screen and reappeared in his aft arc. Yanking the stick hard to the right and pulling it back, Corin wrestled the X-Wing up into starboard, then inverted and rolled out to the left. A laser shot jolted a tremor through the simulator's couch. Lucky thing I had all the shields aft. Corin reinforced them with energy from his lasers, then evened them out fore and aft. Chinking the fighter right and left, he avoided laser shots coming in from behind, but they all came in far closer than he liked. He knew Jace had been in the bomber, and Jace was the only pilot in the unit who could have stayed with him. Except for our leader. Corin smiled broadly. Coming to see how good I really am, Commander Antilles. Let me give you a clinic. Make sure you're in there solid, Whistler, because we're going for a little ride. Corin refused to let the R2's moan slow him down. A snap roll brought the X-Wing up on its port wing. Pulling back on the stick, he yanked the fighter's nose up away from the original line of flight. The tie stayed with him, then tightened up on the arc to close distance. Corin then rolled another 90 degrees and continued the turn into a dive. Throttling back, Corin hung in the air for 3 seconds, then hauled back hard on the stick and cruised up into the TIE fighter's aft. The X-Wing's laser fire missed wide to the right as the tie cut to the left. Corin kicked his speed up to full and broke with the tie. He let the X-Wing rise above the plane of the brake, then put the fighter through a twisting roll that ate up enough time to bring him again into the tie's rear. The tie snapped to the right, and Corin looped out left. He watched the tracking display as the distance between them grew to be 1.5 kilometers, then slowed. Fine. You want to go nose to nose? I've got shields and you don't. If Commander Antilles wanted to commit virtual suicide, Corin was happy to oblige him. He tugged the stick back to his sternum and rolled out in an inversion loop. Coming at you! The two starfighters closed swiftly. Corin centered his foe in the crosshairs and waited for a dead shot. Without shields, the TIE fighter would die with one burst, and Corin wanted the kill to be clean. His HUD flickered green as the tie juked in and out of the center, then locked green as they closed. The tie started firing at maximum range and scored hits. At that distance, the lasers did no real damage against the shields, prompting Corin to wonder why Wedge was wasting the energy. Then, as the HUD's green colors started to flicker, realization dawned. The bright bursts on the shields are a distraction to my targeting. I better kill him now. Corin tightened down on the trigger button, sending red laser needles stabbing out of the closing TIE fighter. He couldn't tell if he had hit anything. Lights flashed in the cockpit, and Whistler started screeching furiously. Corin's main monitor went black. His shields were down, and his weapons controls were dead. The pilot looked left and right. Where is he, Whistler? The monitor in front of him flicked to life, and a diagnostic report began to scroll by. Blood red bordered the damage reports. Scanners out. Lasers out. Shields out. Engine out. I'm a wallowing hut just hanging here in space. With the X-Wing scanners being dead, the R2 droid couldn't locate the TIE fighter if it was outside the droid's scanner range. Whistler informed Corin of this with an anxious bleat. Easy, Whistler. Give me my shields back first. Hurry! Corin continued to look around for the TIE fighter. Letting me stew, are you, sir? You'll finish the Korolev, then come for me. The pilot frowned and felt a cold chill run down his spine. You're right. I'm no Luke Skywalker. I'm glad you think I'm not bad, but I want to be the best. Suddenly the starfield went black, and the simulator pod hissed as it cracked open. The canopy lifted up, and the sound of laughter filled the cockpit. Corin almost flicked the blast shield down on his helmet to prevent his three friends from seeing his embarrassed blush. Nope. Might as well take my punishment. He stood and doffed his helmet, then shook his head. At least it's over. The Twi'lek, Noir Aven, clapped his hands. Such modesty, Corin. Huh? The blonde woman next to the Twi'lek beamed up at him. You won the redemption scenario. What? The gray-green Gand nodded his head and placed his helmet on the nose of Corin's simulator. You had 9 kills. Jace is not pleased. Thanks for the good news, Oral, but I still got killed in there. Corin hopped out of the simulator. The pilot who got you 3, Commander Antilles, he got me too. The Twi'lek shrugged. He's been at this a bit longer than I have, so it's not a surprise he got me. Rysati shook her head, letting her golden hair drape down over her shoulders. The surprise was that he took so long to get us, really. Are you certain he killed you? Corin frowned. I don't think I got a mission end message. Clearly, you have too little experience of dying in these simulators, because you'd know if you did. Rysati laughed lightly. He may have hit you, Corin, but he didn't kill you. You survived and won. Corin blinked, then smiled. And I got Bror before he got the Korolev. I'll take that. As well you should. A brown-haired man with crystal blue eyes shouldered his way between Oral and Nawara. You're an exceptionally good pilot. Thank you, sir. The man offered Corin his hand. Thought I had you, but when you shot out my engines, your missile caught up with me. Nice job. Corin shook the man's hand hesitantly. The man wore a black flight suit with no name or rank insignia on it, though it did have Hoth, Endor, and Bakura battle tabs sewn on the left sleeve. You know, you're one hot hand in a tie. Nice of you to say, Mr. Horn. I'm a bit rusty, but I really enjoyed this run. He released Corin's hand. Next time I'll give you more of a fight. A woman wearing a lieutenant's uniform touched the TIE pilot on the arm. Admiral Akbar is ready to see you now, sir. If you'll follow me. The TIE pilot nodded to the 4 X-Wing pilots. Good flying, all of you. Congratulations on winning the scenario. Corin stared at the man's retreating back. I thought Commander Antilles was in that tie. I mean, it had to be someone as good as him to get you 3. The ends of Nawaraved's head tails twitched. Apparently, he is that good. Rysati nodded. He flew circles around me. At least you saw him. The Gand drummed his trio of fingers against the hull of Corin's simulator. He caught Oral as Oral fixed on his wingman. Oral is free hydrogen in SimSpace. That man is very good. Sure, but who is he? Corin frowned. He's not Luke Skywalker, obviously, but he was with Rogue Squadron at Bakura and survived Endor. The Twi'lek's red eyes sparked. The Endor tab had a black dot in the middle. He survived the Death Star run. Rysati looped her arm right through around Corin's neck and brought her fist up gently under his chin. What difference does it make who he is? Rys, he shot up 3 of our best pilots, had me dead in space, and says he's a bit rusty. I want to know who he is because he's decidedly dangerous. He is that, but today he's not the most dangerous pilot. That's you. She linked her other arm through Nawara's right elbow. So, Corin, you forget you were a security officer, and Nawara, you forget you were a lawyer, and let this thing drop. Today we're all just pilots. We're all on the same side. She smiled sweetly. And the man who beat the redemption scenario is about to make good on all those dinner and drink promises he made to talk his wingmates into helping him win. And that's the end of the chapter. So, I want to get a little bit into why I love this book so much. First of all, that scenario is a historical mission in the original X-Wing game, and it plays out very much the way that they describe it. If you go into that mission cold, you're not going to know what the scenario is. And the way that it works is you have a number of shuttles that have to dock with the Corvette. They're medevac shuttles. You have the Warspite come in. It does launch TIE fighters and bombers just as described, and then it hypers out. And they're coming in from one direction towards the Corvette. When the Warspite returns, it comes back from the other direction and launches TIEs and bombers from that direction as well. And the trick is, essentially, it launches at range, I think initially about 20 clicks out, and that's a long flight. And you have to get out there. The TIEs are a distraction. The bombers are the target, and they have a very thick hull. They've got a lot of missiles, and they will take out the Corvette if they get within firing range. It only takes something like, I think, 6 proton torpedoes to take out a Corellian Corvette. Each of them is armed with 6. There's 3 of them. That's 18 shots from the first flight. You can do the math. Because the hull of the bombers is so thick, if you close to fighting range with them, you're going to waste a lot of time trying to burn through with lasers. So the strategy in this chapter is correct. You do need to use those proton torpedoes to try and take out the bombers. The fighters are relatively easy prey. And their job is to harass you. So if you can't take them out on the first pass, you need to ignore them, then go after the bombers and make sure you take them out as soon as possible. But then the problem is you're way out to one side of the Corvette, and the Warspite's going to be coming from the exact opposite direction, 20 clicks out that way. That's a lot of ground to make up, and it takes a lot of time. One of the things about the X-wing games, and it is the thing that I love the most about it, was they had introduced something called the ELS system. And the way this worked is whether that the power plant of the X-wing supplies the power to all of the systems. You can directly control power to the lasers and the shields, but not to the engines. If you're powering the lasers or the shields over their balanced power configuration, then you're drawing power from the engine. Likewise, if you let your shields or your lasers begin to discharge, you'll gain engine power, and that gives you an additional burst of speed. So there's this constantly having to rebalance your energy systems in order to not run out of laser power, not run out of shields, and still be going fast enough that you can get to where you need to go and turn fast enough when you get there. Um, Energy management is the name of the game. You can also shunt stored energy from the lasers to the shields or vice versa. And so the entire name of the game is figuring out how to balance all of these energy systems to keep you in the game, essentially. Um, so anyway, I know that was a lot of tactic talk, but I love the fact that they did base this novel upon the games. They paid attention to the games. They paid attention to the actual mission scenario, and they described it exactly as it plays out. Also, you might have noticed a short reference there to a reverse throttle hop. If you remember from Heir to the Empire, that's actually a maneuver that Luke pulled while trying to get away from a Star Destroyer to break a tractor beam lock while he went to hyperspace. But it had the effect of burning out his engines and stranding him not terribly far away while Thrawn was looking for him, and he had to rig up a radio antenna to try and get out of the situation that he was in. I think this was before he made it to Merkur, if I remember right. Anyway, that's probably enough rambling for now. I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. I hope you enjoyed this novel series. Let me know what you think, and I look forward to talking to you soon.